J.J. McCarthy's career is going to be interesting because J.J. McCarthy he has kind of that it factor about him. People are going to pay attention to him, and he is simply a winner. Like you look at, he just won a lot of games at Michigan. He makes people around him better. There's some guys that just like part of the reason guys are 5-star quarterbacks, whether it's Trevor Lawrence, Deshaun Watson, J.J. McCarthy, these guys just have a different level of drive to be great. You know, they're true just alpha males. They truly have a relentless mindset to be the best. And you ask them, honestly, they think they are the best. And it's not even in their reality that they're not going to go out and dominate, or at least try to dominate. I think that's what separates an alpha competitor from a guy who's just a competitor. The true alpha competitor, whether it's Michael Jordan, J.J. McCarthy, Tom Brady, Trevor Lawrence, is I'm going to practice as hard as possible. I'm going to refine my technique. I'm going to be obsessed with being great so much that it's not even like when I go out and dominate, I don't even question why I dominated, because I poured everything into practice. I poured everything with being as obsessed with being great as possible. And I think that's what people love about J.J. McCarthy. I think scouts understand that with J.J. McCarthy. J.J. McCarthy has a chance to grow and continue to get better in the NFL. And yeah, the Minnesota Vikings, I think behind closed doors, Justin Jefferson was really fed up with Kirk Cousins. I think some Vikings fans were fed up with Kirk Cousins. I think the Vikings understand that I think that's why there's so many projected trades of the Vikings getting J.J. McCarthy, just because McCarthy's a guy that can solve a lot of the Minnesota Vikings problems. Like, you feel like, yes, Kirk Cousins was getting them to the playoffs, but just like the NFL is evolving quickly, maybe not as much as college football, but just like I feel like the days of and Kirk Cousins is not necessarily a statue in the pocket, but the days of not having at least a mobile quarterback, like if you can't just even Matt Ryan too, for example, like those guys are still I think I guess what I'm trying to get at, I think the days of the pocket passer are done. Like, you'd argue Kirk Cousins does he have some mobility? Yes. But honestly, he's closer to a pocket passer than he is a scrambler. So I think the days of the I think Kirk Cousins really put a limitation on the Minnesota Vikings. You look at the Minnesota Vikings roster, it's a roster where it makes sense to move on from because their roster is just not what it was a few years ago. And I think with Kirk Cousins there, I don't think they're going to go. It'd be at least they'd have to build some more talent to even get to have a team that's capable of winning a Super Bowl. I think JJ, are they going to win a Super Bowl next year if the Vikings get JJ McCarthy? No, but I think he will dramatically improve them. Like, next year they could be a 9-win team, but they could be a 9-win team that maybe has some close losses, and a 9-win team that no one wants to play. And maybe they make the playoffs, maybe they don't, but you can just see the improvement. It's kind of like the Lions in 2022. The Lions had a rough streak that season, but at the end of the year, they were a team no one wanted to play, and people were like, man, if they did get in the playoffs, they would not want to play them. I think even though the Vikings were an average team this year, they may only win 1 or 2 more games. This is all hypothetical if they draft J.J. McCarthy, but I think J.J. McCarthy would make them a team where you're just like, oh man, we got to play the Vikings this week. So I think that's what a lot of Vikings fans are really. I think that's what's anchoring their hope in potentially drafting J.J. McCarthy. Guy just has an obsession to be great. It's what he talked about in high school, and he inspires others to work hard. I think that's kind of the thing. That's why leadership, you look at a business, like, what's the most important thing to help make a business succeed? It's leadership. You talk about what turned Michigan around 2021, 2022. McCarthy, it was Aiden Hutchinson too, working so hard and just an obsession to be great that it just becomes contagious. I think that was the thing with Tom Brady. It's just like Michael Jordan too, with the greats. When you see someone around you becoming so obsessed with being great, Like if you don't try to at least up your game to try to be comparable with them, then you'd really just kind of stand out like a sore thumb. It's kind of like Michigan. Like Michigan beat Wisconsin in 2021, and Michigan got off the plane and and McCarthy and a few guys were practicing. Like that, some guys just have a relentless mindset. It's not even just in college too. You just see it with like some kids that even in middle school, high school, you can see some kids just are. I call it they're destined to be great, just because they understand that what they do is limited. Like you can't play football forever. What they do is temporary. And if what they do is temporary, they're just going to do it at the highest possible level possible. And that's the thing with J.J. McCarthy. I think he is a guy that is just driven to do whatever it takes to be as good as possible. So yeah, him, Jefferson. The Minnesota has a decent offensive line too. You know, the GM Rick Spielman didn't leave the covered bare. You know, Darashaw's been a guy that's been capable at the tackle position in Minnesota. I mean, defensively, they've kind of, some of their pick, like Andrew Booth has not necessarily been great. Lewis Seen not necessarily been great. Kind of missed on some guys defensively. But it's kind of like Caleb Williams being locked to the Bears. It's one of those things where, yeah, the Vikings. Sure, do the Vikings have other needs? Absolutely, but the Bears and potentially the Vikings are, obviously they all hypothetical. The Bears and the Vikings, if they take a quarterback, they're holding out hope. If they take a quarterback this high, I should say, they are holding out hope that this is going to clear up a lot of problems. Like finding an elite quarterback just solves a lot of issues. It's kind of like if you have a company with a bunch of crappy employees, but you have like your management is just like elite. That can solve a lot of issues because there's the Pareto's principle. 80% of the work comes from like a small percentage of the people. So that theory kind of holds true a little bit with the quarterback position in the NFL. Like you look at whether it's Patrick Mahomes or potentially I think with Caleb Williams and J.J. McCarthy, those guys being elite at a position of value like quarterback, it really solves it. Suddenly, the Lewis Seen and Andrew missing on those picks. Obviously, Seen and Andrew Booth are still early in their career, but it looks like they've missed on those picks, and those are fairly high picks. Honestly, it makes those picks not look as bad. Like you look at the Chicago Bears. Struggled to find a quarterback. Jay Cutler, mixed feelings about people have mixed feelings about him in Chicago. You look at the Bears, you're like, yeah, they made some moves in free agency, but did they overpay for Tremaine Edmonds? Did they overpay for some guys? Have they missed on some draft picks? Have they stretched on some picks? DJ Moore, I think was a nice move. Have we made some? I guess has there been some good, some bad, some ugly? But we have the first pick. And Caleb Williams potentially is a generational quarterback. So that's take him. And we shouldn't just say let's hope. But sometimes I think with every decision, there's a little bit of hope in play, even though obviously the Bears are going to draft Caleb Williams and give him his ideal and try to make things as ideal for him as possible. But also they understand that they want to make things as ideal as possible, but they understand that it's just like if he is who we think he is, he should solve a lot of our issues. Gee, I was watching some of the offensive tackles. Really like Olu Fashanu. I really like Talisi Fuaga out of Oregon State. Fuaga this is a guy that he's got really good explosion as a run blocker. When he fires off the line of scrimmage, he can really get into a defender. He's good in pass protection. I think he understands how to deal with pass rushers' hand usage. He really understands that. Got a good anchor in pass protection. Just really good overall in pass protection. So, yeah, Fuaga is a really good player. And whether he projects to guard or tackle in the NFL, I think that's up for grabs. It's obviously up to the NFL team that drafts him. But, yeah, Fuaga has got a skill set I really like. And then, yeah, Joe Alt. From what I've seen, Joe Alt's the best offensive tackle in this draft. I think I was kind of pushing back on that. I needed to go back and watch some tape. But, yeah, Fashanu, Latham, Fuaga, there's a lot of guys to like in this NFL draft, but Joe Alt is the best offensive lineman. I mean, his anchor is borderline elite. He's a really good run blocker, and this is a guy who he understands how to, like, he's so good at, like, his anchor, is really good, but he just understands how to, when a guy's bull rushing, he understands how to kind of, like, stop him and then kind of lift him up to kind of take away their power from him. Like, he just understands that. Like, he understands when, like, his leverage isn't the best, but he understands when to adjust his body to optimize his leverage, if that makes sense. And yeah, he's still not the most agile, fluid athlete. Like, he's not the best athlete I've ever seen in offensive tackle, but he's he's a solid athlete. He's a solid to good athlete, somewhere in that range. And I mean, as physically imposing and as strong he is, just being a solid athlete, is good enough. So yeah, Joe Alt's the best offensive tackle in this class. J.C. Latham, I really like Latham. Latham good in pass protection. Latham kind of like Joe Alt. A lot of times, good offensive tackle are guys that just look the part. It's the thing with Alt and Latham. Just get just big physical specimens, thick lower body. Guys that have, their feet isn't, or for being that big, their feet are pretty quick. Their lateral movements are pretty solid. So that's a lot to like about Latham and a lot to like about Latham, Fuaga, Joe Alt. Joe Alt, yeah, the best offensive tackle in this draft. The Titans at number 7 is a likely landing spot for it. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. But yeah. I absolutely love the wide receiver position. Marvin Harrison, just a stud. Harrison, he is just so good at making contested catches. And he makes contested catches like no one's there. I think the question, like, how good can Marvin Harrison be? Like, I don't think it's crazy to think like his floor could be Julio Jones. What if Marvin Harrison is Julio Jones in the NFL? Like that. That's a huge get. That's my argument for why a team should take him in the top 5, not just the New England Patriots, but the Arizona Cardinals. Like, if you get Julio Jones, like if you knew you were getting Julio Jones, like why would you pass him up? Like, even potentially the number 1 pick. Now I know Caleb Williams is my number 1 player, but like if Marvin Harrison, like if the Bears took Marvin Harrison first overall in this draft, I think a lot of people would be surprised by it, but it would be one of those picks where it's like, I think it'd be crazy to say it's a bad pick. Like, I think you could question it a little bit, but if those words were to come out of someone's mouth, if they said, quote, "That's a bad pick," it's probably not a correct statement. Now, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but like to say that's a bad pick, I think you can say it's a surprising pick, but if you're saying it's a bad pick, I think a lot of people would question someone saying that. So yeah, Marvin Harrison, but that's the thing, like, do you take a wide receiver first overall? But like, I mean, what the thing with Harrison though, like, I mean, I don't know. I guess I don't know really how to make, how to kind of reiterate or how to kind of back up my point any further. But just like, it's just one of those things where, at the end of the day, like, people can hammer home the point where it's left tackle, it's edge rusher, it's quarterback in the top 3 picks. But like, also, like, say the Bears just love Marvin Harrison, and then people look and Marvin Harrison's like the second best player. Like, could you really like hate on the Bears for that pick? maybe there'd be some Bears fans that have some pushback just because they wanted Caleb Williams, but can you really question it too much? Yeah, I saw Peter Schrager's mock draft had Rome Odunze going ahead of Malik Neighbors. I think that definitely could happen, or I think that certainly could happen. You look at Odunze and Malik Neighbors are pretty close. I think they're so close that I think a lot of it could be personal preference. That's what people make this point about receivers, and I think it's a very strong point that like wide receiver is a lot of times just personal preference. I think that's what's kind of hard to rank with wide receivers because there's different types of wide receivers. Like Marvin Harrison's a different receiver than Ladd McConkey. He's a different receiver than Jacob Cowing. Like Cowing probably going to be more of your slot guy. Even Ladd McConkey a little bit. Can he play on the outside? Yes, but is that going to where he's going to really optimize his skill set? Probably not. So I think like Marvin Harris, like receivers it's kind of one of those things come in all shapes and sizes, speed, athleticism, stuff like that. So yeah, I could see. I think it's very reasonable, or I think it's very fathomable that teams could have Rome Odunze ahead of Malik Neighbors. Like look at last year. I think there was some teams that had Jahmyr Gibbs ahead of Bijan Robinson. Too many people get so fixated on consensus rankings that like people forget that the NFL teams do their own evaluations. So like honestly, a team, we might not ever know this, but a team could have Rome Odunze ahead of Marvin Harrison. Like that could be possible. Like that's the thing. Just because the NFL media has said the last 2 years that Marvin Harrison's the best receiver in this draft, NFL teams are doing their own. They have their own scouting. They have their own ways of evaluating guys. They get to interview these guys too. Sometimes they get to know these guys pretty well. They get to know people around them. So they may have Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors ahead of Marvin Harrison. It's possible. The NFL people, they do their own evaluations. And that's the thing people didn't realize, or people kind of forget about last year's draft. We were fed Bijan Robinson's the best running back in this draft class going back from this point 3 years ago. So for 3 years, we've been fed Bijan Robinson's the best running back in the draft class. There's NFL teams that had, I don't know this for certain, but I think the Lions obviously took Jahmyr Gibbs, but I think the Lions did. I think there was other NFL teams that did as well. So that's the thing. Just because the media has staked their claim that this guy is the number one prospect at his position, that doesn't mean all 32 NFL teams are going to see it that exact same way. But yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited to see where Brock Bowers goes. If you look at like 5 mock drafts, Brock Bowers is going in a different position in like 5 different mock drafts. So Brock Bowers is all over the place. There's a lot of guys that are just all over the place. I think the picks 25 through 32 will be interesting. I think like those are all pretty picks. Those picks are usually always pretty interesting each year, just because like teams have, like I think a lot of people, like if you look at the way teams rank, like this year especially, since I think it's more of a top heavy draft, a lot of the guys at the top really stand out. I think if you look at teams like their top 1 through 20, 1 through 25 players, I think that a lot of their team, or a lot of them will be pretty similar. But I think after the top 25, 30 players in this draft, I think it's a lot of, it's not really, there's probably a lot more differentiating. So yeah, I think there might be some surprise picks from like the 25 to 32 range, and then even in like the early to mid second round. Like honestly, like Ladd McConkey is a perfect example of a guy that could go late first round, anywhere from late first round to maybe even early third round. Like Ladd McConkey is just that type of guy. It's just, I think he actually will go late first round, but it's kind of just it's mostly indicative of, or I think a lot of what'll factor into that is just there's just not a lot of wide receiver needy teams. So I think that could factor into that. And especially there might be a run on wide receivers in the first round. So I think Ladd McConkey could go first round, but don't be surprised if he falls, early to mid second round. Another guy, and then Braylon Trice out of Washington. I think Chris Jenkins too. Those are guys like that too. You've seen mock drafts where they're going in late first round, but don't be surprised if those guys fell, to the mid second round. So that's kind of the thing, especially early in mock draft season, if you will. There's a lot of guys who sometimes go at the end of first rounds and then fall like third or fourth round. So that's why you kind of sometimes just have to take mock drafts with a grain of salt. But yeah, I really like this. I think that the top end talent in this draft is really strong. That's what I've said. I think it's the top end talent in this draft is as strong as most years' drafts. Like Brock Bowers, Marvin Harrison. Like people were talking about Brock Bowers, Marvin Harrison, Caleb Williams last year. Like that was not a new. This is not a new topic of conversation. People were discussing, people have been discussing Brock Bowers for 3 years now, Caleb Williams for 3 years now, Marvin Harrison mostly 2 years because he didn't really play to the end of the 2021 season. But yeah, after the 2022 season, people were fully on board Marvin Harrison, a top 5 pick, and most likely the first receiver off the board. And then, yeah, with Dallas Turner was a guy that played a lot as a freshman, too. So Dallas Turner's been getting some hype. But, I think the reason I don't think this draft has as much depth is, you look at, the top, the top 10 receivers are really strong. And then, I guess the receivers are really strong. The quarterbacks are really but even the quarterbacks though, outside the top 5-6 quarterbacks, there's a huge drop off. I know that's been kind of the case the last couple years. I think with the transfer portal, the graduate transfer, a lot of quarterbacks are staying in college more. So you're having a kind of a wide range. You have the top quarterbacks are projected to go high, and then the 6th, 7th quarterbacks you could see fall 3rd, 4th round. You saw that in the case of the draft class a couple years ago. What was it? Pickett, the only first round quarterback, and then there wasn't another one. Who was the next guy? Malik Willis, somewhere late 2nd round, early 3rd. So yeah, that's how the NFL kind of views quarterbacks. The top, on a given year, the top guys. People crave the top guys, or project a lot of the top guys to go top 5, but then after that, there's a huge drop off. But yeah, how many quarterbacks will go? It seems like there's going to be 4 quarterbacks go in the top 5 picks. It seems like that's certainly reasonable. But yeah. But yeah, mock drafts are interesting this time of year. Just a lot of, mock drafts you can argue are completely useless. But I think it is interesting because a lot of these guys, like Peter Schrager, and Jeremiah, a lot of these guys do have NFL connections. So that's why you see guys going higher in mock drafts because they're talking to NFL people. And so once they hear more and more good things about a certain guy, he propels up the list a little bit more. I think that's why I assume I can't confirm this, but I would assume most NFL teams have Joe Alt as the number 1 offensive tackle. I think that's why you don't see in any mock draft another offensive tackle going higher than him. I think that's safe to say that the consensus is most NFL teams view him that way. Probably the case with Marvin Harrison. Teams view Marvin Harrison as the number 1 receiver. I think the fact that Schrager had Odunze, kind of going back to the point I was talking about earlier, I think the fact that Schrager had Odunze going ahead of Neighbors, it goes to show that there is. Now I can't confirm this also, but I think it goes to show that there probably is some NFL teams that do have Rome Odunze ahead of Malik McNeighbors. So yeah, I find that interesting. And then it appears like Dallas Turner seems to be the number 1 edge rusher in mock drafts, and people always have him going 8 to Atlanta. So to me, I think Dallas Turner going 8 to Atlanta perfectly explains how good he is. Meaning, he's not Myles Garrett, Bosa type of edge rusher yet to go in the top 3 picks, potentially number 1. But he's also most likely the best defensive player, and he's a really good player. So the best defensive player, really good player in a position of value like edge rusher. So 8th overall is probably like the perfect position for Dallas Turner to go. And then Atlanta's a team that has been thirsting for an edge rusher. So yeah, with all those things into play, it seems like Atlanta, Dallas Turner taking Atlanta seems just like the perfect fit. You could argue there's not really such thing as a perfect fit, but perfect fit per se. But yeah, Dallas Turner, I guess, would be really what Atlanta Falcons have been missing. A guy like that. Because, I mean, Grady Jarrett's getting older. Atlanta just, I don't know if it was this past year, I think it was 2 years ago, Atlanta just was amongst the worst in getting pressure on the quarterback. And that's just, now in the NFL today, you just have to have guys that can rush the passer. So I think that's why NFL teams are going to love Dallas Turner for not just the 4-4-7, but what the 4-4-7 represents. Like, the NFL has become such a space game. A lot of teams are 60% pass. This guy can rush the passer, he can cover, and he can just pursue and make open and moves almost like a safety. So that's why I guess I'll put it this way. Dallas Turner is the perfect defensive end for the modern NFL game. He's exactly what the modern NFL is looking for in an edge rusher. So yeah, I'm a big fan of Dallas Turner. He's the best edge rusher in this draft. I think I like Jared Verse too, but yeah, Dallas Turner, speed to power is unreal, and I think this is a guy, as he refines his pass rushing technique, I think this is a guy we'll be talking about is, maybe not in the tier 1 edge rushers, but in that strong tier 2. Is he ever going to be, I don't know, it might be a far cry to think he could be a 16, 17, 18 sack a year guy, but could he be like a guy who's like 10 to 13, 10 to 14 sacks a year, and just a really good player and a guy that does get a big second contract? Could he be that guy in the NFL? Absolutely. So yeah, Dallas Turner, good all-around football player. Played 3 years of high-level football at Alabama, and has a chance to continue to make an impact in the NFL, and a chance to be good right away. I think that's the thing. I think teams. I don't think Dallas Turner is a project. Not that people talk about that, like guys that are projects. Some guys are kind of like projects. Like, people gave Trayvon Walker that label a couple years ago. I think Dallas Turner is ready to go. I think, not just 3 years at Alabama, but this guy, like, you watch his tape, you can just tell, like you talk about, like, Rome Odunze looks mature beyond his years. Like, Dallas Turner just looks like he's going to be ready to go in the NFL. Like, this guy just has a natural feel for how to use his hands, a natural feel for how to take on offensive tackle. Like, it doesn't look like sometimes you have, like, Tyree Wilson a little bit last year. Sometimes you have just guys that are just big physical freaks. Clowney a little bit was kind of the case, and are dominant physical freaks, and they kind of just go out there and just kind of wing it, per se, for lack of a better term. You don't get that vibe with Dallas Turner. You get the vibe like Dallas Turner wants to dominate, and he's a really good player, but he's a really good player that just has an understanding of how to attack. Like, I guess in other words, he has a high football IQ. So yeah, Dallas Turner going to be a really good player in the National Football League for a long time, and I think he's got a chance to be a really good edge rusher right away. So yeah, I'm going to wrap with that. Thanks for tuning in to the Brand Partial Show. Stay tuned for more episodes and clips from the show. Till next time, peace. So yeah, it's interesting with this draft class. Is this one of those draft classes at receiver we look back 2-3 years from now and say this was like an all-time great class? Like, you look at, remember, like Julio Jones and AJ Green were in the same draft class. I know that that's just like two high-end draft class from a past draft class. This one potentially has 3, 4, 5 guys that could be really good. And you're talking about legitimately the top 3 could be maybe the best in the NFL in a couple years from now. At least probably 2 of the 3. Like it's not far-fetched to say Malik Nabers and Marvin Harrison may be maybe 2 of the top 3 NFL wide receivers. Some people think Marvin Harrison could be the best receiver in the NFL here in a few years. That's kind of crazy, but that's just the type of talent in this NFL draft class. And this is a good draft class at the top when you have a lot of guys being talked about like that could dominate in the NFL. Like I think in that like the 2014 class when you had like Khalil Mack, Odell Beckham, you had Aaron Donald. There's just some draft classes you kind of get that feel where it's just like there's just going to be a lot of guys that just go on to be very dominant in the NFL. Go on to just be like Rome Odunze. I've said this, but I've hammered this point home with Rome Odunze. Rome Odunze just looks like an NFL wide receiver playing college football. This guy he looks like he's ahead of his. Looks like he is ahead of his time, meaning like he looks like he's already knows the subtle nuances of the position and already knows just how to attack corners at a different level, a level that's on par with NFL wide receivers. So yeah, Rome Odunze, he's a guy that just gets it at the college level, and he's a guy that's certainly going to get it in the NFL, and he's going to have a really strong career in the NFL at wide receiver. But yeah, I absolutely love this edge rushing class. And Chop Robinson, another guy out of Penn State, Chop Robinson, a guy I did kind of the same thing with Jaden Daniels with Chop Robinson. I watched his tape this past summer, wasn't impressed, and then didn't necessarily write him off. But once you kind of get that initial impression of someone, it's kind of like when you meet someone the first time, and then in the first initial meeting, if you don't necessarily like them, then it's kind of hard to change your mind. Same kind of thing with Chop Robinson. I watched his highlights and I watched some of his tape in the summer and I wasn't necessarily impressed. But then you go back and watch his highlights and you watch his tape, and then there's certainly some things to like. His bend, his burst. I think he moves pretty well. He's fairly agile, and he just has I think all the guys, the top edge rushers in the draft, he has all of them have this. I think Chop Robinson has a natural feel for rushing the passer. His hand usage is pretty good. And his play strength is good. It's better than I initially thought. So Chop Robinson was a pleasant surprise when I went back and watched, because my initial impression was not a very good one. But when I go back and watch, I'm like, there's a lot of things to like about Chop Robinson's game. And he was on a Penn State defense that was good last year. And he certainly stood out in many games. He had a nice game against Michigan, the game I watched closely. He was really a key part to why Penn State stayed in that football game. Honestly, if you're honest about that game, Michigan pretty much dominated that game, both sides of the ball for a while, but Penn State was able to hang in there just because Chop Robinson, one of the guys on that Penn State defense, was making a multitude of plays, and Michigan really had a hard time blocking him. His stats weren't mind-blowing from that game by any means, but if you watch McCarthy, McCarthy was under pressure and under duress a lot of that game, and he had to flush the pocket several times because Chop Robinson was getting in the backfield. So yeah, look at Chop Rob. It's kind of these top 5 edge rushers. There's all things to like. There's multiple traits to like about all these guys: Darius Robinson, Chop Robinson, Laiatu Latu, Dallas Turner, and Jared Verse. There's all things to really like about these top edge rushers. And I think that's the thing. Is there going to be a run on edge rushers in this draft? Is there going to be a run on wide receivers? I think that's the question. I think is there going to be, out of those positions, is there going to be, like, I don't know what the over and under is on wide receivers or edge rushers taken in the first round, but is there, like, if there's a run on them, is the over just crushed Like say the over hypothetically for receivers in the first round is like 5. Like if receivers start going, like say Harrison goes at 3, and then Neighbors goes at 6, and then Odunze goes maybe 7, 8, 9 range. Is that if we got 3 go in the top 10? Is that certain that the over of 5 receivers in the first round is that certain that's going to happen? I think if those 3 guys go in the top 8, top 9 picks, I think it's safe to say that there'll be more than 5 receivers drafted, because then people will be like, well, Brian Thomas, another good wide receiver, we'd like him. Maybe Xavier Worthy, just because legit 4.2 speed, that you can't coach that. A.D. Mitchell, another guy people like. Jacob Cowing, a talented wide receiver. So, and then Keon Coleman, a guy that's just an athlete, big body, made a lot of plays this year in big time games. So I think if those 3, I think if Odunze, Malik Neighbors, Marvin Harrison go in the top 9 picks, don't be surprised if there's at least 3 more receivers drafted in the first round. I think the big question is how good Brock Bowers can be in the NFL. Brock Bowers, I mean, you watch him for 3 years, and you're just like, yeah, this guy has a chance to be the next Travis Kelce, George Kittle type of tight end. That's just a dominant tight end in the NFL, complete mismatch. I think there's been some tight ends in years past. Like I think Kyle Pitts kind of got that label of potentially the next generational tight end, but he has not necessarily lived up to that in the NFL. I mean, he's been pretty good. Look at TJ. Same thing with TJ Hawkinson. TJ Hawkinson, top 10 pick at tight end, and I think it's safe to say he's been pretty good. But I think when people say Brock Bowers has a chance to be one of the top tight ends in the NFL, kind of that guy that's in the tier with Gronk, Travis Kelce, George Kittle, just a guy that's just such a threat as a pass catcher, can block, and just such a wild card in any game. I think when you give Brock Bowers the label generational tight end, I think that really that label is fitting. I think you can say that wholeheartedly. I think you can say that without hesitation, because Brock Bowers just is a special talent. I mean, you saw it early at Georgia. You kind of got the feel this guy was going to be something special there. I think, yeah, the cornerback position, another position really strong in this draft. Nate Wiggins is interesting. He had a rise. It seemed like just a few weeks ago, Nate Wiggins was the consensus number 2 corner. Now he's kind of slipped back to the number 4 corner in most people's eyes. Same with Kool-Aid. Kool-Aid was at one point the consensus number 1 corner. Now he's kind of the number 5 corner. So Nate Wiggins, Kool-Aid McKinstry, it might just be NFL evaluators are not as high on those guys, but you look at Quinyon Mitchell, Terrion Arnold, those guys are just getting so much. I think those are guys that just NFL people really like. I mean, Quinyon Mitchell's done everything to move up. I mean, you look at tested so well at the combine, had good Senior Bowl practices, is a guy that just can read the quarterback well. And when you watch his tape, he closes so... If a receiver does make a catch on him on an underneath route, he closes so quickly that the receiver doesn't even have time to get upfield and make a move after the catch. And then Terrion Arnold, just his competitiveness is just out of this world. So Arnold, Quinyon Mitchell, just really special talents, and I think they're going to be really good corners in the NFL, and they have just traits that really stand out, and there's things to just watching their tape, you really get an appreciation for the skill set these guys have. But yeah, with Quinyon Mitchell, I think there's a lot of NFL teams that are saying to themselves, how good can this guy be? This guy may have just barely scratched the surface at how good he can be. But yeah, Drake May, some people believe will go number 2 to Washington. I'm not as big a fan of Drake May. I watched Drake May, and there's things to like. I think he I think he stands tall in the pocket. I think he looks comfortable in the pocket. I think he does a good job. I think he can read defenses fairly effectively, at least from what I see when I watch his tape. And I think he's a good quarterback. There's just not much of a wow factor with Drake May, and he's not he can move in the pocket. Like, he navigates the pocket pretty well, like knowing when to step up, knowing when to scramble and get outside. But he's not an elite scrambler. Nowhere near the level of Jaden Daniels, not even to the level, or not really necessarily close to the level of Bo Nix and JJ McCarthy. So JJ McCarthy, Bo Nix, their ability to scramble and run is much better than Drake May. I think Drake May, it's one of those things where you look at Drake May and you're like, quarterback, a position of value, okay? And then you look at Drake May, there's not a lot to nitpick about his game. So it's a combination of quarterback's a valuable position, and then he just doesn't do anything where you can really nitpick. So with all those things in play, you see why he kind of gets a boost there, just because, okay, you're like, good quarterback, does everything well. Quarterback's a valuable position, so he must be a good quarterback, and in the NFL, a good quarterback is value. That's the thing. Quarterback, obviously, such a valuable position that even just being look at Kirk. Like, Kirk Cousins got big time money. Kirk Cousins has always been a 15 to 20 range ranked quarterback, but that just and like, Kirk Cousins was ranked the number one free agent in free agency. That just goes to show that a good quarterback is almost as valuable as a very good player. And then it's almost as valuable as like an elite defensive player. So I think that's kind of like Drake May maybe like that may be Drake May's ceiling in the NFL is Kirk Cousins, but also I think also what people factor, I don't think Drake May has a low floor or has a very low floor. I think at the very least he's going to be like an average starting quarterback. Like, it's hard for me, like, say Drake May goes to Washington. It's hard for me to picture him just being bad. Like, I think at the very least he'll just be average in Washington, but I think he does have the potential to be a top 15, 20 quarterback, but I think that's kind of his ceiling. Like, I think his ceiling is Kirk Cousins, or his ceiling is like Matt Ryan. So certainly things to like with Drake May, but there is hesitation for me to really get fully on board of taking him as a top 2, top 3 pick. And yeah, I talk about some sleepers in this draft. Jacob Cowing is a guy out of Arizona. Jacob Cowing is just one of those guys where every time in the NFL draft process, a guy like him just flies under the radar, but he's going to be a guy that's drafted 3rd, 4th round, and NFL teams are going to be like, the fan base of that team that gets him is going to be like, man, this guy's pretty good. Man, this guy moves well. He's fast. Oh, 4.38 of the combine? You know what? What's this guy still doing here? Well, he's still there because the wide receiver class is just that strong overall that people, not every guy can be taken 1st, 2nd round, and there's only so many. Not every team is wide receiver needy this year, but that's the other thing. Jacob Cowing, I make that kind of finish that point. Jacob Cowing, a really good football player. That's the other interesting thing. I don't think there's a lot of wide receiver needy teams this year. Obviously, I guess you could argue you can't have too much of any position in the NFL because every position is valuable, even though receivers argued that it's not maybe the most important. But there's just not look around, there's not a whole lot of wide receiver needy teams other than, the Arizona Cardinals, the New England, the team. That's why, I vouch for either of those teams, New England or Arizona, to take Marvin Harrison. But outside of those teams, there's a lot of teams that, could use a receiver, but they're not really necessarily thirsting for a wide receiver.